The product rule and the quotient rule, they really are tied in together. So we're going to start with the quotient rule because that one, if you know that one, then you'll definitely know the product rule. So the quotient rule starts with um, when we're looking at it, it's going to be a fraction. So quotient means that it's a fraction format. So we're going to have a numerator and a denominator. So what we're saying here is we're going to take the derivative of a function f of x that's in the numerator and a function g of x that's in the denominator. And so that's really what it's going to look like. And so we're going to say that this here is going to be high and this one here is going to be low. So there's a couple of ways to remember that. And so one of the ways to remember it is going to be low d high minus high d low over low squared. And what does that really mean? Is that that's an easy way to remember it, but you really don't need it. But some people like it that way. So what they say is that you're going to take this, when it says the low, it's your g of x, the function that's in the denominator. So that's going to be just your g of x. There's no derivative, there's nothing. It's just g of x. And then it's going to be multiplied times the derivative of the high. And so you're going to take the derivative of f of x. So it's going to be times f of x, the derivative of it. And then you're going to have minus, so you can't confuse these two. It has to be low, and then it has to be the high one. So think of it as a mountain. You're starting low, you're going up, high, and then you're going high, and then going back down low. So this is your low, d high, high, d low. And so, and then you're subtracting that in between there. So there's a minus at the top. And so you're going to have the high, which is your regular f of x, not the derivative, and then the derivative, the d low, which is the derivative of the low, which is g prime of x. And then this is all over the derivative g of x, the low squared. So do you have to remember, and so that would be your derivative of h of x if that's what we were looking at. So do you have to remember this? No. Can you remember this? Yes. And if you remember this, if you put it in this order, the product rule is going to be the same. So when we take the derivative of a product, we are going to do f of x times g of x. That's two functions we're multiplying together. It's going to be the same as up here. I'm just going to keep it pretty much the same. It doesn't really need to be this. So it could be the regular g of x, f prime of x, and then same thing here. It's going to be f of x, g prime of x. And instead, it's just going to be a plus, nothing in the denominator because it's not a fraction. It's not a quotient. So that's what we're doing. So that's the product rule. So you are going to need to recognize when you need to use the product rule. So if it's written like this, quantity of two things being multiplied, that's a product. So you're going to have to use the product rule on that. So we're going to say that the first product is f of x, the second product is g of x. So the derivative of f of x is going to be 6x, and I'm sorry, just 6. And the derivative of g of x is going to be 3x squared. And so what we do is we just fill this in. So we write down the normal x cubed minus 3, and then the f prime of x, which is just going to be 6 times 6 plus f of x, which is just a regular 6x plus 5, and the derivative of g of x, which is just going to be 3x squared. The rest is just algebra. So we have this, it's going to be 18 cubed plus 15x squared. So when you calculate it, it's going to be 24x cubed plus 15x squared minus 18. And so this here ends up being your derivative of h of x. So that's how you do the product rule. Let's do another product rule. This one here, the first product is f of x, and then the second one is g of x. So the derivative of f of x is something you should already know. We've done that enough for the power rule. This becomes 0. So we know that it's going to be 1 over 2 square root of x. The derivative of g of x is going to be 3x squared. So the first derivative, the g of x, we leave it alone. So we have x cubed, and then derivative of f of x is going to be 2 square root of x, and then plus, and then we leave the f of x alone. So it's 1 plus square root of x, then the derivative of g of x. So we end up with x cubed over 2x plus 1 plus square root of x. And I'm just going to multiply that out on there. So it's going to be 3x squared plus 3x squared square root of x. Now, this has a lot of stuff in it that we could combine. So I could make this x to the third and x to the minus 1/2 over 2 plus 3x squared plus 3x squared x to the 1/2. So if I am subtracting from it, so I'm going to have, it turns out that they're going to be, when I subtract this, because you're adding these fractions to 3 plus a negative 1/2, so you're going to be subtracting the fractions there. It's going to be minusing 1/2. You're going to make that fraction, it's going to come out because this is going to be 6 over 2, so that's going to be 5/2. So this one here is going to be x to the 5/2 times 1/2 plus, this is going to be 3x squared. This is going to be the same thing, so it's going to be 2 plus 1/2. So that also becomes 4 over 2, which is 5/2. So that's going to be 3 to the x to the 5/2. So these are actually like terms. So your final answer, h prime of x, is going to be, if we look at that, and we can leave it as a fraction, right? So 3 plus a half, that's going to be 7/2. Um, x to the 5/2 plus 3x squared. That is your final answer on there. Okay, so that's why you had the delta math on exponential rules. That's what it really is equivalent to. Okay, now this one here, it's pretty much the same thing on here. We're having the product rule, so we know that the derivative of f of x is going to be g. If we're going to keep it standard to the other one, it's going to be the original h of x, the derivative of g of x, plus g of x, h of x. And so if I want to find the derivative at 10, I'm just filling this in. So it's going to be of 10, g prime of 10, plus g of 10, h prime of 10. And so the derivative there is going to be h of 10 is 560 times g prime of 10 is 0 plus g of 10, which is negative 4, times h prime of 10, which is 35. So this becomes 0. H prime of 10 is going to be negative 140.